we are going to learn about the reabsorption in distal convoluted tubule. Now, for understanding this, please pay attention. This is your brain. Not too small. Now, this part of your brain, this is called cerebrum. This is called cerebellum. Now, over here, there is one part of the brain which is called amygdala. But this part of your brain is called as thalamus. And below the thalamus, there is a part of the brain which is called hypothalamus. And below hypothalamus, over here, there is the smallest gland of your body, but the most powerful gland, that is the pituitary gland. Now, generally I did talk about pituitary gland before. Now let me remind that thing. If I draw a larger diagram of a pituitary gland, I told you it has 3 lobes. This one is anterior lobe. This one is posterior lobe. And this one over here, this is called as median lobe. Now, I told you anterior always means front and posterior always means behind, back, right? Now, this is the anterior end. Feet are posterior end, right? Now, if a horse is standing, its head is at the anterior end and tail is at the posterior end, right? So, this is the front, this is the back, and this is the middle. Now, most of the hormones, they are produced by the anterior lobes. Only one hormone I told you is produced by the median lobe, and no hormones are produced. Now, please pay attention to my words. No hormones produced. No hormone produced by the posterior lobe, but it do release. It releases 2 hormones, ADH and oxytocin. Now, I am saying 2 contradictory things. One, I am saying does not produce any hormone. Second thing, I am saying it releases these hormones. So definitely, if it is not producing but releasing, so it will be getting from somewhere else. So this part of your brain, hypothalamus, this is very important part of your brain. The hypothalamus, it is called as neurosecretory region of brain. Now, this hypothalamus, it's very important because it detects many internal stimuli. Now, remember when we talked about stimulus, it is the external or internal change. If the body temperature changes, that is the change inside the body, not outside. If you have fever, that is the change in your body's temperature inside. That change in temperature is detected by what? Hypothalamus. If the content of water in your body increase or decrease, detected by hypothalamus, that is the change inside the body, right? And as it is detecting the changes, that is the neuro part of the part of this part of the brain, and it produces ADH and oxytocin. It also produces ADH and oxytocin. Now let me tell you one more important fact. hypothalamus does not produce only these two hormones. It produces many other hormones as well. Like, let me give you a little idea. It's not in your syllabus, but you see it is in MDCAT, and you see when you will go. So I'm just giving you a little idea. I am drawing your little brain now. Again, over here, this is hypothalamus. Here, this is what? Pituitary gland. And here is your thyroid gland in your neck. Thyroid gland, now remember one more thing. You have learned this in O levels as well. That your pituitary gland is called master gland. Do you remember this or not? No? Okay, I'm telling you right now. Pituitary gland is also called as master gland because it controls rest of the glands as well. It controls their secretion. You are going to understand it right now. Now, pituitary gland produces a hormone which is called as TSH. You guys know the thyroid gland produces what? Thyroxine. Now, interestingly, even thyroxine is of two types, T3 and T4. We are not going into that detail. You know only one thing, that thyroid produces thyroxine. But how does it produce? The message comes from the pituitary gland in the form of TSH. What is TSH? Thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, very good. Good point.
Yeah, it comes from
yes, FSH. Thyroid stimulating hormone. But who gave the message to pituitary gland to produce thyroid stimulating hormone? Hypothalamus produces a hormone which is called as TRH, or most appropriately TRF. Now, what is TRF? Thyroid releasing factor. So basically, the stimulus came from where? Hypothalamus, which instigated pituitary gland to produce TSH, which instigated the thyroid gland to produce thyroxine, right? So it means that if this is a boo, this is dada boo, right? So if this is controlling rest of the glands of the body, but definitely someone else is pulling the strings, and that is what? That is hypothalamus. Hypothalamus. All right? Yes.
Wasn't the hypothalamus there to produce the hormones?
No. Because you see, for that purpose, you must have some genes turned on and turned off. Right? We'll talk about that inshallah later. Right? So those genes are only on where? In the pituitary gland. Alright? So the basic purpose is over here to make you understand that hypothalamus produces ADH and oxytocin, and ADH and oxytocin are stored in the posterior lobe. Understand? ADH and oxytocin are stored in the posterior lobe. It is just like a storage area. And on requirement, they will be released from here. Now please pay attention over here. Let's suppose that this is what? This is the distil, convulated tubule and collecting ducts. This is now. Remember one thing, I told you this when we were learning about the reabsorption in the nephron in general. We learned that in the distal convulated tubule, reabsorption of water takes place only under certain conditions. And it happens under the influence of ADH. Now the full form of ADH is anti-diuretic hormone. Now please pay attention. Yes. Now there can be two conditions. One, let's suppose summer season. We sweat a lot, right? And our body is also producing urea. Even, you see, right now when I'm talking, you see, when you talk a lot, your mouth becomes dry. Why does it happen? Because if you guys remember in the beginning, the first lecture of the homeostasis and first lecture of excretion, I told you, when I'm exhaling, I'm excreting water. So I'm at loss of water, not only by sweat, from my mouth as well. When I'm exhaling through my nose at that time as well. Right? And when I'm urinating at that time as well. So, if I do not drink enough water, there will be shortage of water in my body. But the water content should be what? Maintained. What will happen when the blood will flow through the brain? It will reach in the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus Osmo Receptors. The receptors that detect water content, they are called what? Osmo Receptors. They will detect that the water content is low. Then they will send the message to pituitary gland. Pituitary gland will release the ADH. ADH will travel in the blood and will reach where? Over here. Right? Now, the epithelium of this distal convoluted tubule, its cells, they are specialized cells. They have special structures in them. They have special kind of vesicles in them. Again, I am not drawing rest of the structures. Now, the vesicles which are present in them, they contain aquaporins on them. So these small vesicles that I am drawing in the epithelium of the distal convoluted tubule, these vesicles contain what? Aquaporins. Vesicle contain aquaporins. Now we already know what are aquaporins, right? That these are the channels through which water molecules can pass. Now, one thing is obvious. If these vesicles come and they join with the cell membrane, what will happen then? The number of aquaporins will increase in the cell membrane. As the number of aquaporins will increase, so more water can be what? Reabsorbed. Now, another thing which you need to remember, that this, now I am going to ask a question. Now in AS, we have learned about the mode of action of hormones. Do you remember that lecture or not? Chapter number 4. Right? There are two types of hormones. Polar, non-polar. Remember that or not? The polar ones cannot enter inside the cell. Do you remember that? And non-polars they can enter. Steroidal hormones are non-polar. They can enter inside. Right? While the peptide ones or amino acid ones or protein ones, they cannot enter inside because they are polar ones. ADH is a polar hormone. It cannot enter inside the cell. It cannot enter inside the cell. So what did I do? I drew these receptors, right, on the outer surface of the basal surface of the epithelium of the distal convoluted tubule, right? Now what will happen? That over here, let's suppose that this is what? This is the blood vessel, a blood capillary, right? And this blood capillary, it has brought this ADH. Now ADH will come, and this ADH, what it will do? It will bind to what? To the receptors. Now you guys have learned in detail the whole process. Remember, I told you the topics of AS can also come in A2. Now when this hormone will bind to the receptor protein, what is the next step? Who remembers?
Endocytosis.
Very good. Activation of the G protein. And then production of what? CAMP. That is called what? A secondary messenger. Do you remember this or not? So let me draw a larger diagram of one of the cells. Now, these are what? Receptors. What happened? That the hormone attached with it. What happened over here? There was G protein, its activation took place, and because of that, what happened? An ATP molecule changed into CAMP. CAMP, not GDP. Adenosine monophosphate, right? 2 phosphates are released, and this CAMP is called what? Secondary messenger. And then after that, what will happen? A cascade of chemical reactions. Now, in response to the cascade of the chemical reaction, eventually such reactions will take place. We are not going into that detail, not in your syllabus. That what will happen? That those small vesicles that had what? Aquaporins, they will start moving where? Towards the cell membrane. They will start moving towards the cell membrane. Now there is another topic which you guys learned in chapter number 1 and chapter number 4 as well. Bulk transport. Endocytosis and exocytosis. Do you remember that or not? Now, in exocytosis, what happens? When the vesicles come and attach to the cell surface membrane, they become part of cell surface membrane. Do you remember that or not? So what will happen over here? Just like by the process of exocytosis, when this vesicle will come and bind to this membrane, it will become part of what? This membrane. Obviously, 2 things will happen. This membrane will become larger. And as this vesicle contains a lot of aquaporins, so another thing will happen, what? Number of aquaporins will increase over here. Let me show it with the diagram. Now what has happened? That this vesicle came and bind over here, right? Like this. Now what has happened? These aquaporins, they are attached over here. Understood everyone? So as the aquaporins number will increase, what will happen? The water will start coming. Now obviously, remember, this all is happening when there is less water in the blood. It means that in the blood over here, the water potential is what? Low. Right? So through these channels, the water will start coming out. The water will start coming out, going back into the blood. Understood everyone? So what will happen? This is how the water is reabsorbed. Now, let me tell you one more thing. The reabsorption of water under the influence of ADH, it happens only where? In the distal convoluted tubule. But reabsorption of water can also take place at the site of collecting ducts as well. Reabsorption of water in collecting ducts. Now just imagine that this is what? This is the nephron, right? And this is what? This is a collecting duct, right? Now around the collecting duct there is tissue, right? Obviously there is tissue. And in the tissue, what will be there? Interstitial fluid. Now if the interstitial fluid has low water potential and higher solute concentration, then what will happen? Obviously water will come out of the collecting ducts into the interstitial fluid. Understand? And from the interstitial fluid it will go where? Into the blood. Yes. Okay, let me tell again. Don't worry. Collecting duct came down over here. Around the collecting duct there is tissues, right? In the tissues there is interstitial fluid, right? If there is less water content in the body, the tissue fluid or the interstitial fluid, it will become what? Concentrated. Understand? Now, as the interstitial fluid will become concentrated, it means that in the interstitial fluid water potential is low. But in the collecting duct, what is present? Urine is present, right? And if the urine will have higher water potential, so what will happen? Water will move out from the collecting duct and will go where? From the urine into the interstitial fluids. Now you understand? And from the interstitial fluid, the water will go back where? Into blood. Right? So even at the level of collecting ducts, reabsorption of water takes place. Alright? Give me 2 more minutes. A quick overview so that you guys understand. Small brain has hypothalamus, produces ADH and oxytocin. We are only discussing ADH. Stored in the posterior pituitary gland, only released when there is less amount of water in the blood. Detected by the hypothalamus Osmo Receptors. Remember that? When released, the ADH will travel in blood and will reach to the distal convoluted tubule. This is the epithelium of the distal convoluted tubule. Right? ADH will bind to the receptors, cannot enter because it is polar. When it will bind to the receptors, G protein will be activated and ATP will change into CAMP, which will act as secondary messenger, will start cascade of chemical reactions. Because of that, the vesicles which are already present inside the cytoplasm that contain a lot of aquaporins will start moving towards the cell membrane. When they will move towards the cell membrane, by the process of exocytosis, they will bind to the surface of the cell membrane. In doing 2 things. 1, increasing surface area of the membrane. And second, increasing number of aquaporins, right? So surface area will be increased by binding of the vesicles containing aquaporins to the cell membrane, and number of aquaporins will increase, and by that the flow of water will increase from the higher water potential to lower water potential. Water will be what? Reabsorbed. Understand? And I told you reabsorption also takes place where? In the collecting ducts. If the surrounding solution is what? Concentrated. Just one more minute. Now this was during summer season. What happens in the winter season? There is enough water in the blood. Right? Osmo receptors in the hypothalamus, they will detect. They will not produce, or they will not send the message to the posterior lobe. Do not release ADH. ADH will not be released. As the ADH will not be released, these vesicles containing the aquaporins, they will not come and bind to the membrane, right? So surface area will not increase, aquaporins will not increase, reabsorption will not take place, so excess water will go into the collecting ducts, out into the urine. Got it? That is the reason in summer season when you urinate, usually your urine is darker in color, concentrated urine. And in winter when you urinate, it's usually lighter in color, and if you drink enough water or some beverage, it may become transparent as well, right? Because there is excessive water. Okay? So this is what the reabsorption of water is there in the distal quality.